It was an early, empty, and still morning at the southern docks in Alvaton. The submarine city paused overnight, in a peaceful quiet that seemed to stop sound. The only noise was the subtle rumbling of routine maintenance on some of its limbs. Soon its engines would start and the wandering city would jolt to life again, continuing a steady march through the barren ocean valley the navigators had led it into. But at this moment, in Alvaton, we focus on one hurried person throwing on their ship suit. The blue suit with its golden visor was part of the new research fleet purchased by Ardnabridge University. Thanks to ample funding from the council, the students had some of the best research opportunities in the city. The hurried person was a student herself. Her name was Linaria. She had been on expeditions before, but this was her first solo mission. Several reports had come in describing a new reef, many spans south of the city's current location. The reports were full of descriptions of lush flora, and to the delight of the council, more ruins and broken bits of technology from whoever lived here last. The exact spot she was investigating was said to have a working bit of old tech, although Linaria hypothesized the preliminary explorers spotted the blue glow of a bioluminescent fish or plant, rather than centuries-old tech still working. Old tech underwater never lasted longer than a decade, at best. At Ardnabridge, she specialized in old tech, especially focused on remaking mostly working replicas. Although she doubted the claim, having some actually working tech to learn from would be a dream come true. The lack of new discoveries, or discoveries only for biology students, halted most research at the university. Everyone was eager to continue learning about whoever it was that built these structures and why they left. Linaria was rushing to the dock port where she was meant to set off, a large glass door separating Alvaton from the ocean that surrounded it. She desperately wanted to set off, her steps tapping the metal floor of the docks anxiously as she ran, desperately eager not to be late. The sound of her boots reverberated off the glass dome of the airlock beside her. She could only imagine what it would be like to be out there by herself, making notes on what she found interesting and visiting places she wanted. For Ava's sake, miss, I'll repeat, where are you going? The suddenness of the voice stopped Linaria dead in her tracks. The dock supervisor was standing in front of her, clipboard in hand. I'm investigating location R046. I'm a student at Ardnabridge. She had completely zoned out. She had gone over this moment in her head hundreds of times the past week, but still struggled to remember her lines. I'm going to need a name, miss. Can't let just anyone out the city. Council orders. Linaria Harmond, sorry, she said. After this, the airlock supervisor handed Linaria a schedule to complete. Her name was already filled out, and the signature of a professor at the university was scribbled at the bottom. She filled out the relevant times and locations she would be investigating, and, after a thorough search, was cleared to leave Alvaton. She got in her ship and started gliding away from the city. The first few days were spent just getting out of the messy glow of Alvaton. Much of the wildlife in the ocean didn't like being close to the city. Linaria could see why. Almost every creature and plant here was brightly luminescent, a literal sea of colour, a silent communication between species. The overwhelming light cast by the city, and its mechanical legs and limbs, intimidated even the largest creatures. Linaria had grown up around all this, as had many generations before her. She had heard stories about what the surface was like back on Earth. Linaria was human, but alien in this world. She had heard stories, passed down and warped, containing many tales of home. Much of the stories from Earth centered on the weather. Under the ocean and insulating frozen surface of the planet, Linaria's people did not experience weather at all, let alone the storms of electricity and the currents of air that ripped buildings apart from the stories. Right now, however, Linaria was watching a bloom of jellyfish from the comfort of her ship. Each one had a single glowing eye that took up most of its head. The cross-shaped pupils stared intently upwards. A series of smaller glowing spots trailed down each of its stinging tentacles, becoming dimmer at the tips until they faded completely. She watched them for hours. After breaking herself from the jellyfish's trance, she travelled a few more hours, gliding the ship close to the seafloor. As she approached her destination, more and more life appeared all around her. Fields of red and orange grass, with tiny fish darting between them. Large crustaceans gnawed peacefully at corals. Larger, filter-feeding plants had arms stretched out into the currents, the tips glowing gently as they swayed. She wondered what minerals they were gathering. The new ship had the technology to analyse many of the materials without having to take them back to Ardnabridge as well, although she noted some of the sensors were behaving a bit erratically. The ship glided across the terrain. She kept track of the species spotted and some aspects of their behaviour. A stone brick cone-shaped structure was perched at the top of a small hill. A large portion of the bricks had been eroded by the ocean, however a doorway could still be made out, situated at the top of the structure. The metal hinge remained, although completely rusted. The door itself was lost. Some small metallic scraps were being picked up by the ship's sensors. Something larger kept triggering the motion detection, but only momentarily. Checking the windows personally, she didn't spot anything of note. Linaria decided the new ships probably just needed calibrating. Several days had passed, and Linaria had been keeping meticulous notes on her location, timing, and research. She'd arrived at the location with the supposedly working old tech. Thankfully, it didn't take long for her to spot the blue light from the reports. The glow was cold and it blinked at very regular, mechanical intervals, although it occasionally flickered like a failing bulb. She moved towards it. The motion sensor tripped again, but she was focusing on maneuvering the ship past a series of rocks and corals. Linaria's eyes widened as the tech itself came into view. This was the discovery she had been waiting for all her academic life. She took images of the object. She quickly made notes, annotating the still developing images. The device was made of purple metal with a partially open dome. The glow was emanating from this dome, and a beeping had started. As the photos developed, she noticed something strange. All the fish were cowering in the crevices of the rocks and plants. The beeping grew louder, and the red light of the motion sensor started blinking rapidly. Linaria looked up from her notes and into the black eyes of the giant in front of her.